what does trust look like beyond the first click?
What trust is what fills the gap between knowing the customer, being able to know everything, and them feeling comfortable.
Now they need to know how to deal with consented data in this data relationship that you mentioned with the customers.
Actually, the data is their customer.
Yeah. You've got the consent, you've followed all the rules, so why do your customers still ghost you after the first click? Maybe they don't trust you as much as you think they do.
Welcome to the Privacy-Led Marketing Show. I'm Adelina.
And I'm Kirsty. Today we're talking about something every marketer is dealing with, whether they realise it or not. How to build trust in a digital world. The way we handle data collection from consent forms and banners is shaping how our customers see our brands. In the first nanosecond, they decide if they can put their faith in you or not. The data shows that while people want control, they don't trust in all industries equally. Finance and medical are high on the trust list, while retail and social media are at the bottom. To find out how we can move beyond performative trust, we're thrilled to have Chad here with us from the Privacy Experience Agency. Chad has helped some of the world's biggest brands figure out the difference between performative trust and real strategy. So we're thrilled to have him here with us today. Hi, Chad.
Hi, Kirsty. Hi, Adelina. Hi. Yeah, I'm really excited to be here. This is just the sort of thing that I spend my day at P talking about with our clients, big platforms, Meta, TikTok, Microsoft. And I've spent about 30 years in this whole area thinking about trust, be it at WPP, Yahoo, AOL, some of the old names, Vodafone, ITV. But at P, this is what we're set up to do, to really help clients get to grips with trust and build data relationships with their customers.
Incredible. Well, let's get into the questions. The data shows that 44% of people say transparency is the number one driver of trust. But what does trust look like beyond the first click? I would love to hear your thoughts on this.
Well, first of all, I think it's important that first click that people give on a website or on an app actually sits with the consented data part, right? Like what are you showing them about the data you're collecting and what for? And the fact that that comes before they even experience the rest of your website and app actually shows how much you need to think about this and what strategy you have around it, and not to be just a compliance checkbox, but indeed like how do you build the trust so you get the data that then is very much needed for growth. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this.
In fact, I'd step a little bit further back and start to think about what happens before the first click. And I'd say the first thing you have to do is you have to rehearse, you have to help people understand what's going to happen. That means having a strategy. I mean, with our clients, what we find is they're missing a strategy. And without a strategy, you don't really know what you're going to do after the next click. And what do I mean by a strategy? That means breaking things down into simple stages to manage the customer and the customer experience, from nurturing them and helping them rehearse and set their expectations, through to activation, then through to onboarding, then thinking about how you extend any consent into new areas, and really importantly, and this is often the missing area, defend that consent. And you have to put that in the context of trust being absent. I mean, we can talk about building trust, but the going-in position should really be there is very little trust. We live in a world where trust is a scarcity. So rather than thinking, how do we maintain or grow trust, it's about how we establish it at all.
That's interesting, because those that don't have a strategy before first click, we're seeing that people are going in their settings and adjusting it so they're blocking. So that's essential. If you've got the strategy, that's going to reduce the amount of people
but
that
also
are adapting the
setting expectations,
yeah.
Rehearsing. There are lots of R's that we use, and rehearsing is one of them. The other really important one that we think is the precondition of trust is respect, right? The company, the brand wants trust. In order to get that trust, you have to show respect. And those respectful interactions mean no surprises. Really do.
In the world of online, we talk a lot about attention span shortening, but it's the same. It's not just about attention, it's about trust. How do you build that trust online? The first microseconds, right? What impression you give, indeed, the expectations. And I think once they are there, what's the value exchange?
Well, That's one of my hot buttons, the value exchange. We try and get our clients to stop talking about the value exchange and start talking about proposition development. Because what really they should be doing is thinking about what the proposition is to the customer, what the perceived value is, how do they articulate that value back to the customer. We find that the value exchange is a little bit of a kind of empty expression at the moment. Well, actually, over the last 30 odd years, people have been talking about the value exchange, and when they're pressed on what that actually is, they often struggle to answer. But in marketing, we have tools. We have proposition development that helps us think about what customers want, how we give it to them, and how we communicate with them about it.
And at every step of the journey.
Yeah, exactly. So it starts with proposition development, really. And about that nanosecond, another one of the R's we talk about is reorientation. So we're big believers in behavioral science, and system 1, thinking fast, and system 2, thinking slow. So what you really need to do is think about how you get people out of system 1 and into system 2 so that they can appreciate your messages, they can pay attention to what you're doing, because so much of the interaction between a user and the consent interface is habitual and on automatic pilot. And it's very hard without the reflection to get them to think about trust and to take on your trust building and your respectful measures and communications.
And what are the classic mistakes we're seeing brands make? Would you say it's the performative trust, that they think they're giving the customer what they want and they're not listening to the customer at all?
I think not listening to the customer, not knowing the customer, not understanding that the customer is very confused. I mean, in some of the eye tracking studies we've done, we know that customers, when we ask them to look at privacy policies and to study privacy policies, they study cookie banners. They don't know the difference. And unless you start to really understand that there is a lot of confusion in the market amongst customers about what these things are, what they can do, how they work, you're always going to get off on the wrong foot. And it's very, very hard to claim that you're building trust if customers don't know the very basics of what you're putting in front of them.
And in one recent research paper that we're seeing that they actually want to know, to build trust, they want to understand what's happening with their data, what's the value exchange and all these things. So they do want to know, they do want the education.
Yes, yeah, but we have to remember as well that trust is about the absence of knowledge. I mean, this is very complicated, it's very difficult technically. What trust is what fills the gap between knowing the customer, being able to know everything and then feeling comfortable. And that's really what you're trying to do, because if you start to over-educate and treat it as an educational process, they've got to understand the latest technology. They've got to understand what you're doing. They've got to understand the intricacies of your privacy policy. That's not going to happen,
No.
right? What trust does is it fills that gap and says that, and admits that the customer is feeling vulnerable. They're making a decision where they're giving you their data. There's jeopardy in that. They're asking you to behave well, to behave fairly, to do the right thing with that data in the absence of being able to know everything. And that's a really important thing that you're doing. You're building a data relationship that underpins your business and your brand through doing that.
It's so interesting. So it's respect. And what were the other R's you said?
Reorientation, yeah, and rehearsal. But we would say that there's also another one, another R.
I feel like I need to be writing this down.
And that's relevance. And that's where that's ultimately what you're thinking about with your value proposition, is how you're articulating relevance. Because ultimately, what you're trying to do is collect data for particular purposes so you can be more relevant to your customers. And customers have no problem with relevance. They want you to be relevant. That's what they want. The idea that they would think you should be irrelevant to them is ridiculous, or that you should give them irrelevant information. And helping them, again, make that link between the data that they're giving you and the relevance you're providing is really, really important.
I think this chase for personalization, for relevance, it's for marketers since more than a decade at least. And yet we are still not finding our feet overall as an industry. Sometimes it's awkward, sometimes it's not properly done. What do you think it's holding marketers back from truly resonating with the customers and providing the relevant experience that they need?
I think it's really hard to be relevant. And we've used the promise of personalization far too freely and not delivered on it. We've made promises, and again, trust is about delivering on promises.
Yeah.
Right? And back in 30 years ago, when I was starting out, in those days of one-to-one marketing, we were talking about being more relevant, more personal. When you talk to customers about it, that's not their experience. That's not their experience. What they want to see is more relevance and less targeting. Now, the technology might be the same, but the mindset, the attitude, the way you're thinking about it is much, much more customer-centric and much more about delivering value to your customers. So that's why we try not to talk about personalization. That's the technology. Relevance is the outcome, and you find no customer can argue with that.
So let's get practical. What is the first thing you would recommend a provable, trustworthy brand would do once it's engaged with a customer?
You need to start to understand how consent works across your entire business. What are the business units which are dependent on consent and on the types of data? How are you taking in all the different regulatory pressures, but also balancing off commercial, customer, and compliant interests, triaging them, and building a long-term strategy and vision for how you manage the data relationship. We would say you need to build a capability around your brand. Your brand is your most powerful asset in communicating to customers and helping them rehearse, helping them understand that actually they're going to be okay. That vulnerability is something they should worry less about. Then policy and compliance, although what we call it is business rules. Because what business rules are a way to translate the law and corporate policy into things the business understands. And time again, we find that there's a linguistic or language disconnect between the way that the compliance and the legal teams talk about this and the information that the commercial teams need. We then also think there needs to be new capabilities around consent marketing. Not marketing because I have consent, but the marketing of consent, or more broadly, what we call permissions, which is not just consent, it's legitimate interest, and it's also using data under performance of contract. So the full range of the data relationship and how you start to market that. And that means putting in place a number of different stages and thinking about the marketing activities under each of those stages. How are you nurturing your customers so that they understand what they're stepping into? How are you activating them? How are you onboarding them as well? So this is all standard marketing language, but applied within the consent and permissions world. How you extend consent. And again, we think this is really important because when you walk into, say, I know, a bank, you take out a bank account, they don't immediately try and get you to buy every single financial service that they have in offer. They have a way of upselling, of cross-selling, of extending that relationship, of deepening it. And that's really what we've got to learn from. Again, this is standard marketing talk. And then defend. This is where the failure happens. This is where people leave. And as a kind of a consent industry, if you want to call it that, we pay far too less attention to the way that people are unsubscribing or opting out. We're not thinking about that, and we're not seeing that as a major indicator about our propositions, about our brand health, and what we're doing with our customers and their data. So I'd say you need to build capabilities across those areas. And I got to marketing and then went dug a bit deep there. You also need to think about your customer experience for consent and how you are managing that experience. You need to think about analytics. There's way too little measurement, and thinking about actually how you diagnose the problems and you drive behaviors. And then, of course, you need the technology. You need the platforms, the tools, the services that underpin all of this. But that comes after having your strategy, knowing how your brand works, understanding how the business can interpret what the law and what policy says, understanding how you're going to stand up marketing teams who are going to drive and manage consent, and understanding how you design the experiences, and then you measure that you're being effective. So while we could talk about what happens immediately after the consent, I would say there's a way bigger problem that we need to solve, which is around, do we have the capabilities in our businesses, and do we have the sufficient maturity to really make the good decisions about what we do next? And I don't think we're there yet.
And I'm seeing it from the perspective of Usercentrics. One of our solutions in the market is CookieBot, consent management platform. And we're advocating a lot for contextual consents, which is kind of related to this concept, as you put it, data relationship. That at every step in the journey, you can build more bond, you can get more of their data and their interests, their preferences as well. What do they want to give the data for, and so on, and what to be contacted for, and what to be advertised for, and so on. And this contextual consent, it's still kind of not even a bit accepted in the market or like used in the market. And that's because it's not just about the tools. It's, as you said, all these things that come before the capabilities, as you call it, the strategy, how you're thinking about it, and so on. And there are ways to do it, and I think only now we're starting to see this maturity. I think marketers have dealt with data for the last 2 decades or so of the digital world, and now they need to know how to deal with consented data in this data relationship that you mentioned with the customers. And that's an evolution, it's a journey, it's not like everything at once, and so on. And this is something that marketers only now are starting to grasp.
And that data is just a proxy for their customers. That's what that is. I mean, and maybe that's part of the problem, that it's easy to think about data, but actually the data is their customer. And then you have to take yourself back to the human being who ultimately pays the bills and will buy your products and your services. And the data is to help you understand that. I mean, I think 30 odd years ago, there was a phrase that really influenced me, which is, data's there to know things for your customers, not about them. And that's one of those things that I think is a good place to hang your hat when you're thinking about how to manage that data relationship.
So I think one of the key takeaways here is that we can go back to basics a little bit. Like, of course, things are changing and everything's moving so fast, but the fundamentals of marketing still apply, and we can't race ahead if we don't have that foundation built.
Yeah, you anchor things on your customer. Definitely. That's your anchor, and you should, and it's really important to build all your processes around that.
Amazing. Thank you. We asked you on LinkedIn what was the biggest sign of performative trust, and the answer was overwhelming. The audience clearly feels disconnect between the promise of personalization and the reality of the experience. Option C, they disliked when the brand used the phrase, "We value your privacy." Now, is this a shock to you that people don't like that terminology?
Overused, definitely. If it doesn't stand for anything beyond that, people can see it.
I think, yeah, it's overused. And also, it's very empty. It's very empty. Companies may be putting a lot of effort into that, but from a customer perspective, it feels very empty. There's so little trust. There's so little trust. In fact, I mean, some of the language that's used about consumers and the way they deal with the digital world is around resignation, that they feel resigned to the fact that whatever happens, it's not going to be in their control. Things happen to them, not for them. So when one talks about trust, there's all to play for because it's at a very, very low level. But you also have to cross over the cynicism. And "we value your privacy" is now, I'd say, a phrase that people are very cynical about.
So we've spoken about value for the customer, but how do we defend the value for the business? How are we getting the CFO on board?
One's talking to a CFO who has seen extraordinary sums of money pass across their desk in investing in digital transformation, which the core assumption is we're unlocking the value of data, then actually it should make sense to them that the whole professionalization of the data relationship with the customer and ensuring a continuous and secure supply of that data to underpin the investment in digital transformation is a really good idea. But that really means you need to up your maturity, invest in your capabilities, and show your professionalism.
Lots of interesting discussion there. Is there one key takeaway that you'd want our watchers to have?
Marketers to realize that it should be their ownership around all these things. that once they manage that, they manage the full customer relationship, and that's the most important. There are no parts that should be given to other departments or disregarded. So you can't build a brand or sell products if you don't manage your full customer relationship, their full experience online, and that includes their data relationship.
Absolutely. I'd say start with the strategy. Think about that strategy in terms of the whole business, not just marketing. I'd say think about that strategy in terms of the capabilities that you have to build and how you start to drive their maturity. That sounds like a very sensible place. It's not exciting. It's not kind of rolling your sleeves up and throwing yourself into tweaking little bits of the kind of the choice architectures of banners, but it's how you get this right.
And it's what you mentioned, right? Thinking fast and slow.
Thinking fast and slow.
Stopping for a bit.
Yes, and being able to say you're in control of this, and that you're managing it, and that's really, really important.
That was super interesting. Thank you so much to both of you for joining, and thank you to you at home for watching. We'll see you in our next episode, and until then, you can watch all our previous episodes on the channel. See you soon.